right, so for the inverse of linear functions today, we're going to be doing it with equations. We are skipping the graphing. We did just the definition yesterday. Today we're looking at the equations, and we're going to find the inverse of a linear function. So today specifically, we're going to be looking at linear functions. So for the steps today, we are given the steps to find the inverse of a linear function is to first change the function notation to y. So that means we're going to take our f of x symbol, and then we're going to switch it to a y, okay? Step number 2 says to switch the x and the y variables, but you don't move anything else. Just switch x to y and y to x, basically, okay? So we're going to have like a y equals 2x plus 3, for example. The y is going to switch to x, and then the x is going to switch to a y. And then that's all we're going to do for step 2. And then in step 3, we're going to use algebra to solve for the y variable. And then for that, I like to use PEMDAS in reverse. You can think of it as PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally in reverse. So first you get rid of any addition or subtraction. Then you get rid of any multiplication and division. Then you get rid of exponents and parentheses as you're solving. But we're doing PEMDAS in reverse, okay? And then we're going to rewrite the y variable using inverse notation. So after we solve for y, we're going to get a y equals something. So like let's say I get y equals a 1/2 x plus 3 or something. The y is going to then switch to f inverse of x. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing today, looking at equations. Step 1, change f of x to y. Step 2, the x and the y switch places. And then step 3, solve for the new y. And then once you have y by itself, then you switch the y to f inverse notation. Okay? So let's look at our first example. Can I have you guys please copy this example here? We have f of x is equal to negative 3x minus 12. All right, so again, our step number 1 is to switch this f of x. The whole thing is going to switch to a y equals, everything else stays the same, negative 3x minus 12. All right, then my step number 2 says to switch the x and the y. So the y becomes an x, and everything else stays the same, so equals negative 3. And the x switches to y, minus 12. So in the step 2, only the x and the y switch places. And then for step 3 is when we start solving. So step 3 is to solve for the new y, okay? My goal is to get this y by itself now. So I got to get rid of the negative 3, and I have to get rid of the negative 12. But we're going to use PEMDAS in reverse, okay? So please excuse my dear Aunt Sally in reverse. So first we get rid of any addition or subtraction. So do you guys see any addition or subtraction on this side over here? No, well, I have this minus 12. That's a subtraction, right? So how do we get rid of subtraction? We add 12 to both sides. So the 12 goes away. And then I'm left with x plus 12 equals, bring down the negative 3y. And then I look for multiplication and division that I can get rid of. So I can get rid of, that's negative 3 times y. So I can get rid of the negative 3 by dividing. But this time I'm going to divide by all 3 terms. Instead of writing one whole fraction on the left side, I am going to split it and divide by each term by negative 3. Okay, so then here the negative 3's cancel. And then here this is like a 1x divided by negative 3. So all I'm going to do is like take the fraction and move it out front. So this I'm going to change to a fraction, negative 1 over 3. And then attach the x next to it. So negative 1/3 x. And then what's 12 divided by negative 3? Negative 4. And that equals now the y by itself. So now I solved for y. The last thing you need to do is switch it to inverse notation. Okay? So step number 4. I'm going to move the y to the front simultaneously. So I'm going to take this y, move it to the front. But I also have to change it to inverse notation. So this was a function f. So this is going to be f inverse of x equals, and then just copy the rest of it. Negative 1/3 x minus 4. And that's our final answer. Okay, so just to review, again, step number 1 is to take the function notation, change it to y. Everything else stays the same. Step number 2, the y switches to x and the x switches to y, and everything else stays the same. And then we do PEMDAS in reverse. So get rid of adding and subtracting first. So we got rid of the negative 12 by adding. And then multiplying and dividing afterwards. So divide by the negative 3. And then isolate the y. And then just switch it to f inverse at the end. Let's look now at another example, but we're going to be looking at fractions this time. So for this one, please copy. This time the g of x. So g of x is equal to 2/3 x plus 4. All right, look back at the last example we just did and see what was our step number 1. Close. Can I have righties? If you're sitting on the right side, tell your partner what was our step number 1. What did we do first? Okay, so what did we do first? Change the function notation to what? To y. G of x changes to what? Everything else stays the same. All right, step number 2. Take a look at the last example we just did, and then lefties. If you're sitting on the left side, tell your partner what was step number 2. All right, what do I do next? Switch the x and y. Y becomes an x equals 2/3, and the x becomes a y plus 4. Okay. Then for our step number 3 is where we start solving. So remember we're doing PEMDAS in reverse. So please excuse my dear Aunt Sally in reverse. First you get rid of adding and subtraction. So do you see an adding or subtracting? So plus 4. So you get rid of that first. So subtract 4 to both sides. And I get x minus 4 equals 2/3 y. Then I need to get rid of multiplying and dividing. But notice that's a 2/3 times y. 2/3 times y. So in this case, you can do it two ways. You can either multiply both sides by 3 first, and then you're going to have to divide by 2, or what's something that we can do to get rid of the fraction in one step. We have to multiply by something. And see if you guys remember. This is something maybe you learned in like 7th grade or something. How do we get rid of fractions? Multiply by, not the inverse, but what are you trying to say with this? What do you mean by opposite? You take the fraction and you flip it. What's that called when you flip the fraction? The reciprocal. Okay, good. Somebody remembered. So we gotta take this and multiply both sides by the reciprocal. The sign stays the same though. So that's, instead of a 2/3, you're gonna flip the fraction and multiply by the reciprocal. So that's 3/2 to both sides. 3/2. And what that does is it cancels the fractions. Like the 2 cancels out the 2, and the 3 cancels out the 3. And then you're left with the y, okay? And then here, because that's multiplying, you need to distribute the 3/2 to both things inside the parentheses, okay? So this is going to be a 3/2 x, and then that's a 3/2 times a -4. So I'm going to do that on the side. I'm going to do that on the side. So 3/2 times a -4/1. And then we need to cross cancel. So like the 2 goes into itself one time, and into -4 how many times? 2 times. But I still have the negative out front. So I'm going to just kind of bring it there. And then I'm left with 3 times -2, which is going to be what? -6. And then that's going to equal y on this side, because the fractions go away. And now that I have the y by itself, now I have to go back and switch it to inverse notation. But notice this was a g of x. Because this was called g of x, when I write the inverse, I have to write it as g inverse. So move the y to the front. And we're going to call this g inverse of x. And then copy the rest of it. 3/2 x minus 6. And that's our final answer. All right, so we're going to do some practice problems now. So for the next one, you guys can practice this one. Please copy the function f of x equals 2x minus 8. Okay, so when you solve, again, you switch f of x to y, then x and y switch places. Then you start doing PEMDAS in reverse. So add 8 to both sides, and then divide by 2. But when you get to here, what did we do on the last example with this x/2? We have like a 1 in the front. So this becomes a 1/2 x. And then what's 8 divided by 2? 4 equals, the 2's cancel. We're left with y. And what's our last step? What do? Change y to inverse. My function is f of x again. So this is a f inverse of x equals 1/2 x plus 4. And that should be your final answer. How'd you do? Show me a thumbs up if you got it. And like I was close, or I didn't even know what to do. So almost. I see a lot of thumbs up, so that's good. Okay. All right. So let's practice one now with a fraction. go ahead and copy this one now. We got f of x equals negative 1/3 x plus 5. So with this one, you're going to have to multiply by the reciprocal of the negative 1/3, which is going to be negative 3/1. So see if you can do this one. I'll tell you the answer. You should get f inverse of x equals, I think it was negative 3x plus 15. See if you guys can get that. All right, so let's go over this one. Once you get the fraction, the negative 1/3 y, to get rid of it, remember you multiply by the reciprocal. So it's 1 over negative 3 switches to negative 3/1. So then the fractions cancel. And when you distribute, remember that negative 3/1, that just means negative 3, right? So negative 3 times x gives you negative 3x minus, and then for the next part, it's negative 3 times negative 5. That becomes positive 15. And that equals the y. And then the last step is to move the y to the front and switch it to function notation. Question?
Was negative 3/1x still fine?
Negative 3/1x. Yes, that's fine. All right, so then our answer again is just, don't forget to switch it to f inverse. That's a common mistake people forget to do, is switch it to f inverse and then you get points taken off. So don't forget to switch it back to function notation, okay? All right, let's have you guys try this last example. Let me zoom in for you guys. F of x equals 3/4 x minus 9. And I won't tell you the answer this time. I'll see if you guys can get it. All right, so it seems like a lot of you guys are getting stuck on this point here. So what do we do to get rid of the 3/4? What should I do to that? Multiply by the reciprocal, which is the 4/3 to both sides. And then the 3/4 and the 4/3 cancel. But then this is kind of where I saw a lot, as I was walking around, a lot of you guys were getting stuck here. But you do 4/3 times x. Is there anything I can cancel there with the x and the 4/3? I can't cancel anything, right? So you just bring it down. That's 4/3 times x, okay? In the next one, though, I can simplify. The 4/3 times a 9. You can kind of cross cancel there if you want, but I think it's easier if you do it on the side. 4/3 times 9/1. How many times does 3 go into 9? 3 times, right? 3 goes into itself once, so then you're left with 4 times 3, which is 12. So you go plus 12 equals y on this side. And then our last step is to just switch the y now to f inverse. So the y, I think it is f still, right? Yeah. So y becomes f inverse of x equals 4/3 x plus 12. And that's our final answer. Okay? All right. I believe that's our last example. Yes, that is our last example. So you guys are going to be able to do the homework now.